I'm joined today by Harriet Alexander, a journalist based in New York. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, hello.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Peter Navarro. He was Trump's only economic advisor through his first term, played a role in trying to overturn the 2020 American election, becoming the first White House official in American history to be convicted of contempt of Congress. And now Navarro is senior counselor for trade and manufacturing to Trump. So, can you give me a little background of just who Peter Navarro is and how Trump became aware of him?
So Peter Navarro is a fascinating character, and he's been in the Trump orbit for some time. He was first introduced by Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, of course, who's married to Trump's daughter Ivanka. And Jared Kushner had come across some of Navarro's work. Now, Navarro has a PhD in economics. He studied at Harvard, and he was a professor at university in California as well, in Irvine. So he is somebody who's spent his entire career studying economics, and he became increasingly fascinated by China, interested in trade, interested in what was happening in sort of global trade dynamics. He also found time to run for mayor of San Diego unsuccessfully. At one point, he was even a Democrat, but as his career progressed, he became more and more hawkish on China. And he's written now well over a dozen books, a lot of them focusing on China. One of these books was turned into a documentary. That was called Death by China. They've all got sort of equally dramatic names. And it's this that Jared Kushner, we believe, saw or read. He introduced Navarro to Donald Trump, and it really was a meeting of minds. Navarro was very much speaking Trump's language. So he joined the first White House of Donald Trump's administration.
How influential is Peter Navarro on Trump's tariff strategy, as I guess is the main question here?
Oh, he's absolutely the architect of it. He's very influential. I mean, you've got to remember that Donald Trump is a New York businessman. He's a real estate developer. So he's someone who, in his previous life, was pretty happy in international transactions, international deals. He was, what the White House now likes to term a globalist because he was very outward looking in his business deals, dealing with people from all over the world. And now that has, of course, dramatically changed because of the MAGA movement, which he founded, Make America Great Again. And Peter Navarro has been really influential in that because Navarro has spent his lifetime working on these theories. And these theories are essentially that China has been ripping off the United States for decades, and that the president needs to do everything in his power to stop that from happening.
Does sound kind of word for what Trump has been saying over the last few weeks, at very least. I understand that somebody called Ron Vara was particularly influential in the writing of Peter Navarro's books and his works. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, Ron Vara, so an interesting character. Ron Vara appeared in Navarro's first book in 2001, and he was described as an economist, and he was somebody who then popped up frequently in Navarro's books with incredibly inflammatory, really, things to say about China and about what they were producing and the sort of the threat that was posed by China and their trade policies. And then the Chronicle of Higher Education started looking into this because they were bemused by this Ron Vara character, and it turned out that Peter Navarro had invented Ron Vara, and he admitted to it. He was confronted by the New York Times, and he said, "Oh, it's taken you this long to get onto this." He'd been for 20 years. He'd been quoting Ron Vara. And he thought was sort of amused by the whole concept. Ron Vara, of course, being an anagram of Navarro's name. He thought it was just a sort of a witty aside. It was a bit of an insider joke. But the problem is that he was presenting this Ron Vara's quotes in an academic work, in something that was really arguing a point to give legitimacy to his arguments. And yet he was using a fictional character.
What was the fallout from this discovery? Because surely, at the very least, it's misleading, if not applying there is more intellectual basis for some of these thoughts than just Navarro himself.
I mean, yeah, it certainly raised eyebrows, to say the least, that he was inventing an economist who he was quoting to support his own theories. But, it came out really in 2019, and Navarro stayed in the White House. Trump seemed to be amused by it. He didn't take offense by it. And Navarro remains, to this day, one of Donald Trump's most loyal lieutenants and advisors. So, it hasn't really harmed him at all.
Do we know the basis of where Navarro came up with some of his policies? Then, if not Vara, then where did this all come from?
Well, I mean, Navarro's theory, Navarro's approach, is the result of academic study. It's his very passionate belief that China is abusing the United States and has been doing so for decades. And Navarro was a professor. I mean, he was somebody who was fully immersed in economics, and he really went very strongly down this path. I mean, of course, it gathered him quite a cult following, because if people who were disaffected in, sort of the Rust Belt areas of the United States, if they were looking for someone to blame, then China became a very obvious culprit. So Navarro, was really sort of seized on by people who were looking for an explanation, really, as to why their steel factory was closing, as to why the manufacturing was ending in their part of the US. So Navarro got this cult reputation. But yeah, I mean, he was a legitimate character. I mean, to certain people within the MAGA community, he certainly still is. He's very much their guiding light on Chinese abuse of the system. The New York Times described him as being Rasputin-like in his sort of zealotry, in his obsession with this. And it's really something that he believes in passionately. But also, interestingly, it's driven a wedge now with him and some people in the White House.
Beat me to my next question there. One person in particular would be Musk, who had a very public falling out, shall we say, with Navarro, much of which we can't repeat here. But where did some of that come from? Because surely Musk is a bit more of a free tradist and Navarro is much more of a protectionist, as some of his books would suggest.
Yeah, so you have people like Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon, who are real purists in this idea that American manufacturing needs to be all brought back, that you can't have plants outside of the US, that everything needs to return to United States shores. And of course, that contrasts with people like Elon Musk, who, sure, he wants the best for the American economy, but also he's a businessman. And he has a lot of his business in China in particularly. And so that has really created an interesting dynamic, to say the least, between two men who are not shy about expressing their opinions, it's safe to say. Navarro said that Elon Musk was a car assembler, not a car manufacturer. And that really, really hit a nerve, because Musk then hit back and said that Navarro was dumber than a ton of bricks. And then he apologized to the bricks. And he's called him a moron, and he's invented some more creative names and insults for Navarro. So the two men are absolutely opposed on this. Interestingly, they are both still very influential within the White House. Donald Trump, he quite likes this, and the White House press secretary asked about this rivalry between these two, very strongly opinionated people. The press secretary, Caroline Levitt, she said, "Oh, boys will be boys."
Who do you think seems to be winning out most between Navarro and Musk with the recent step back from tariffs?
Well, it's interesting, because Musk has said in the past couple of weeks that he's actually going to step away from DOGE, this Department of Government Efficiency that he created. He said that this was his intention all along, that he was going to be temporarily in the White House, helping Trump, doing what he saw as vital work for the U.S. interests. People have also pointed out that if he stays much longer, then he's going to have to start filling out declarations of his interests, and that's probably not something he really wants to disclose. But Musk seems like he's going to be leaving the administration fairly soon and getting back to his day job, which is running Tesla, which is running SpaceX, which is the Boring Company. I mean, all of these interests that he has. But when it comes to actually the trade issues, the trade war, who is winning, it's difficult to say really whether it's Musk or whether it's Navarro or whether it's the markets that are really winning, because Trump was really going down the Navarro line, and he's held that to a certain extent, especially with China. When you think that he's paused the tariffs on most of the world, but on China he's held firm. And people have interpreted this as saying that's what Trump wanted all along. That's what Navarro wanted all along. Navarro was less interested in tariffs on the rest of the world, but really laser focused on China. So, when you look at that, you could argue that Navarro is perhaps the one who is winning in this, that Navarro, not Musk, is getting his way when it comes to China. But at the same time, in the past few days, over the weekend, we've seen exemptions. Trump has said, I don't change my mind, but I'm very flexible. And yet there are now exemptions on things like smartphones, iPhones, all of that, electronics, laptops, televisions, because the US simply cannot make those at the moment. Those things like an iPhone has components from 40 different countries around the world, and the US does not have anywhere near the level of precision manufacturing that is needed to make an iPhone. So, your average iPhone, the iPhone 16, the newest one, was going to go from around $2,000 to about $4,000. And that just makes it unaffordable for most Americans. So over the weekend, the White House rolled back the tariffs specifically on economics. But then Trump has since said that, he does not like the word exemptions and that he wants it full steam ahead. So, sort of watch this space, really.
Going back to Navarro, do you think that some of his, like you say, cult following was responsible for the, frankly, misconception that tariffs were paid by the country they were applied to rather than the consumer or business?
Yes, I think perhaps that is. I mean, Navarro talks, of course, only about the benefits for the United States of severe tariffs on China. He talks, in the long term. I mean, and of course, he can afford to take that perspective because he is not representing constituents in the way that members of Congress are. He's seeing it very much from an academic perspective, and he's a wealthy man. He's unlikely to be too troubled by the immediate cost of cheap clothes or toys and things like that. So he can afford to take this perspective, but perhaps ordinary Americans liked the idea. A lot of Americans like the idea of increasing American manufacturing, but they don't like the idea, the reality really, that it's going to put up prices enormously. And I just think your average American was not particularly sophisticated. Neither is your average European, right? About the intricacies of trade law. They liked the idea, but they didn't perhaps really get the dynamic of it all.
And touching again on the fake name parts of things, I understand Trump frequently used fake names, some alleged, some he admitted in court. Do you think that could be partly why he was a bit more lenient with Navarro?
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Donald Trump himself used these aliases. This was sort of back in the 80s and 90s when he was determined to get positive coverage for himself and for his business endeavors in the New York media. He used to ring up the New York Post in particular regularly as somebody who went by the name of John Barron. And Trump actually in later years admitted that he was John Barron. I think it was sort of one of the worst kept secrets in American media was that Donald Trump was using fake names to call up TV stations and newspapers and provide glowing reports about Donald Trump's business empire. It was coming from the man himself. So I think that you're definitely onto something there. I think that's a large part of the tolerance that Trump has for Peter Navarro / Ron Vara because he's done it himself.
But obviously, there is an ethical difference between speaking nicely about yourself in the press and referencing a non existent person to support your academic works.
Yeah, I think I think that's very true. That Navarro's use of an alias is, I would say, significantly more concerning than Donald Trump's, because Navarro was publishing academic books. He was a respected professor. He had a Harvard degree. He's somebody who sort of set himself on a pedestal, really, as someone who could be believed, and was an authority on the subject. And yet, to create this persona, this fake character in the middle of his books is just bizarre. I mean, it's amazing, really, that he got away with it for so long. And he said that himself, actually. I mean, Navarro has said that he likes to portray it sort of like a Hitchcock character who would just appear in his books, but that's certainly not standard academic practice. And you imagine that the people who did not have the support of the US president would see their careers rapidly come to a undignified end if they attempted anything like Peter Navarro did.
So is Peter Navarro or Ron Vara most responsible for Trump's tariffs, do you think?
There's the question. Yes, I think Peter Navarro existed before Ron Vara, and Peter Navarro has existed after Ron Vara. So I think it's Peter Navarro who is very much setting the tone when it comes to tariffs on China, in particular. Against what some in his White House would like. But I think it's Peter Navarro, and Ron Vara is an intriguing element from his past, but someone who keeps on popping up every now and then to remind us of the flamboyance that happens, that it has become routine in the White House.